Hello, good evening and welcome to the program. The veteran Indian diplomat J.N. Dixit says that going to Geneva was one of his greatest wishes, that he always wanted to be in Geneva. Why does Geneva hold such significance for diplomatic officials? Of course, it is the heart of most diplomacy in the world today, being the neutral country, being the home of the Palestinian nations. Gentlemen, Madam, thank you very much for joining us on Newsfirst. Dr. Danja Tilaka, Professor Rajiv Vijay Singh, and former Ambassador Tamara Karnaikam. I'd like to start off with the question. It's an open question. Feel free to pick up and run with it. Several public representatives, civil servants, former civil servants, in the present time have been talking about the crisis in the Foreign Service. Dr. Jaya Tilaka, notoriously, and also Professor Vijay Singh, in your ongoing series of articles on your blog, we've seen several scathing indictments being made of the Foreign Service in its present state. What is the root of this collapse?
Professor Vijay Singh?
Professor Vijay Singh?
Essentially the root of the collapse is a complete lack of either principle or practicality. The ministry seems to be run by three people, one of whom should be highly qualified, but even the president agrees that he should go. He'll GLP this. Vasantha Senak had said this very clearly. When he spoke to the president had not even denied the fact that GLP must go, because he's been a terrible minister. And I go back to what Pat Butanis told me. When I said listen to the people, they were complaining about Vimalvira Vansa. I said listen to the officials. She said, who are they? Who can speak for the government? I said GL Mohpiris and Mohan Piris. She said neither has any credibility anymore. And if you talk to any ambassador, with one exception, they have not a good word. Then you have a secretary who has betrayed the country continuously. I think you must ask Tamara about her dealings with a terrible construction firm, fraudulent dealings in Geneva. I think you must ask Dan about her dealings with Western countries when the president professed to be non-aligned, and also about her efforts, which everyone knows about, to undermine our relations with India. And then you have Sajin Vaskunawardhana. There's no qualifications at all for the position. The president once told me, at least now that he's there, they answer letters. But in fact, they did not answer letters. The Human Rights Council never got any replies for the first 2 years. But the worst part of it is he seems to think diplomacy is about bashing people up. In fact, in one of my ongoing series, he is bashful of the seven dwarfs. There's a pun there. But what is worse is that very clearly he simply wants to dominate. I think there was a discussion he'd had with a businessman. And he said that man thought that he had a direct line to the president. So there's this desperate attempt to control the president. The president once told me that one of the problems may hamogma ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ වැඩ බදාගෙන ඉන්නවා. අනෙක් මිනිස්සුන්ට දෙන්නේ නැහැ. No capacity to delegate. The president's problem is now he is the one who is බදාගෙන ඉන්නවා. People are clutching him to their bosoms. And the poor man can't escape. So I think you cannot have any recovery until those three blights are removed.
Former Ambassador Karnaikam, I'd like to go to you now. Professor Vijay Singh says that this all started with the appointment of unsuitable persons to positions of power within the Foreign Service. Now, you were in the Foreign Service at a very decisive time. Dr. Jaya Tilaka, I'll come to you in a moment. In 2009, Dr. Dayan Jaya Tilaka quite famously recorded a victory for Sri Lanka at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. But in 2012, under your stewardship in Geneva, we faced a defeat. What was the cause of this defeat?
Before I come to that question, let me quickly go back a little. September 2011, when I took up the first Human Rights Council that I was present in, and because I arrived 2 months before that. Now that was definitely not a defeat. In the sense, again, it depends. Now we have to see defeat for home and victory for home. But as far as I was concerned, because I defended the sovereignty of the country, and I also was defending, if you like, the multilateral system, which is the only system that allows small states to be equal with larger states, it was for us a victory. Because there was a resolution, it was a US draft resolution which wanted to put Sri Lanka on the agenda for the March 2012 session. Now we don't speak, nobody speaks about that particular resolution, but it was moved by the Canadians. We didn't even know, by the way, that that existed. When I arrived there, I didn't know that there was a draft. I heard about it from a diplomat. I was not in Geneva still, I was still in Havana, and I was told, look, there is a draft, and it was sent to Shenuka Seniviratne in her private email, and by the US ambassador in Geneva. And so I contacted Colombo for instructions how to respond to this. Colombo was not aware, that is, the foreign ministry was not aware, nor was the president's office aware that there was such a draft resolution. And then of course we got instructions.
But how could they not be aware? Surely our diplomats in Geneva were doing something. They would have been informed of the existence of such a draft resolution if it was just about to be moved.
I have heard about this from a diplomat in Geneva who was aware of this draft that was sent to the private email of Shenuka Seniviratne. This is what I was told. But when I wrote formally to the foreign ministry asking for instructions on this particular draft, I understood, and I copied it to the president's office. I was told that they didn't know that there was such a draft. And so I, in Geneva, I took the initiative. I started talking to different ambassadors, and from different countries, developing countries, from Western countries, and I sent back a report to Colombo saying, this is what I have discovered. I need to come to Colombo to discuss and to have a briefing and to receive instructions on how we are going to proceed, how we are going to address this, what position we are going to take. I was refused authorization to come to Colombo. And then I talked to the president. I said, this is a very serious matter. I need to know. I'm coming from Havana. I've been 4 years out. I've been a year in Brazil, 3 years in Cuba. So I need to know how what the government is thinking in terms of how we're going to address this issue. So I did come, and that's another story. I don't want to go into that right now. But so let's have that. We succeeded finally in having that draft resolution withdrawn by mobilizing our traditional allies and by implementing the non-aligned policy. That has always been, that was my instruction, that is in the mind of Chintana, and I was told we pursue that non-aligned policy, we don't negotiate with Washington, which is the position I took when I was there. But there was a problem with the delegation that came from Geneva, with Shenuka Seniviratne on it, Sajin Bas, Mohan Peris, Mahinda Samarasinghe. They had a different line, which I discovered later, much later, when I heard from other delegates, government delegations, not Sri Lankan, who told me that they have heard that we are negotiating with Washington, and this is the result is that we're losing a lot of support, because the moment countries think that you're having a bilateral negotiations, they will not support, they won't take sides, if you like. So we were losing a lot of support, and I had to make a public statement to say that we were not negotiating, and we managed to win back the support that we were losing like a pack of cards. That's what I was told. So we did, the Canadians withdrew it, so it was a major victory for us, but it was never made public in Sri Lanka. What was made public was the March 2012 resolution.
March 2012, that was where all the focus was. Now you're saying here that the cause of this defeat was the delegation that came from Sri Lanka.
There was I don't want to make this a personal issue. It doesn't have to do with this or the other person. I think there was very clearly a political orientation. There was a change in policy. It happened at the time that I was there. So it happened, I think, in the period around March. At least it manifested itself during that time. I think there was a group inside, within the government, which had taken control, and that group was, I like to call it the cartel, and they were functioning in terms of their group interests, not in defending the interests of the country or the people of Sri Lanka. So there was a shift in policy, and that was because that group had, in the internal power struggle, had gained control. This is my view. And so we had, on one hand, I had got instructions not to negotiate Washington, continue with the non-aligned policy, and on the other hand, I think they had received instructions to negotiate. And I discovered this much later, that they were negotiating. Now this is in March, not in September 2011.
You say they had received. You say they had received instructions, and you also say this group is working in their own self-interest. Who's instructing them?
I think, well, instructions have to always come from above. They always come from above. I received instructions very clear from the Minister, Foreign Affairs, Professor Pires, and also I had the same instructions confirmed by the President. I discovered, it was on the last day, the day before the resolution was adopted, I discovered that I had been told not to ask for the draft, not even to look for it, because that would give the impression we are negotiating. And I was informed the day before by the Indian ambassador that they had been discussing with Washington, because they wanted to ensure that the resolution was protecting the national sovereignty, not only Sri Lanka but national sovereignty of countries in general, and especially small developing countries, because they are the ones who benefit most from sovereignty, because they're small countries. So he informed me to say that we have now agreed, and it's going to be tabled, and that this was only known to India and to Washington. So and he asked me to communicate this to your minister, because that's the normal channel for communicating between two ambassadors. One ambassador doesn't communicate directly with the minister or vice versa. So I informed the minister, and I discovered that he was seated there with the whole delegation, because they had parallel meetings. They had meetings outside, and I was not aware of it. In fact, I had invited them for dinner that night, and they said, no, tomorrow there's going to be the vote, we cannot come because we have to go to bed early. But they were seated there, and he said, but we are discussing the draft resolution, and we have it in front of us. And I said, but how did you get it? And he said, well, it's been sent by email to all the missions. How come you don't know? You don't know what's coming to your mission. And I said, Minister, I'll check this. I called the IT officer, and she said, no, we haven't received it. Then I checked with other missions. It was now this is night, probably about 8 to 7:30 in the evening, and the other mission said they didn't receive it. So they had got it from somewhere, and I was very concerned that there was some group that was negotiating, and that Professor Pires didn't know, that he was not aware of it, because somebody had told him it's come to the mission. So probably he was not involved in the negotiations himself. And
can I interrupt for 1 second? At one of the meetings you were there, Mohan Pires said, but what if they want to negotiate? And GL Pires said, no, our instructions are not to negotiate. But Mohan kept pushing the point.
He was saying we should negotiate, because otherwise we're going to be defeated.
Dr. Jatilaka, in 2009, you famously won in Geneva. Did you face these sorts of pressures from what Ms. Kurunagam is calling cartels?
Well, let's first understand what the diplomatic achievement or victory or whatever you call it was. I have with me a piece from the Times, London, which says, battle begins to establish UN Sri Lankan war crimes investigation. One would assume that this story was dated March this year or last year or 2012, but it's actually May 21, 2009, and the byline is James Bourne in New York. So this is when the battle began, to establish this UN war crimes investigation into Sri Lanka. We defeated that effort quite decisively with a near two-thirds majority. Rajiv was very much part of the battle in Geneva. And it is sad and shameful that in a Human Rights Council, which is preponderantly third world, I mean it's composed of states from the global south, that we have lost 3 years running, 2012, 2013, 2014, and now face a very serious UN inquiry which will carry the imprimatur of the United Nations. We also have friction or gaps in our relationship with our only and giant neighbor India, as we have seen over the issue of the Chinese submarines. So we are in a serious foreign policy crisis on two fronts, the western flank and in the neighborhood. Now, you asked me whether I didn't have this sort of problem in 2007-2009 when I served. Well, I do remember very early on, sometime in 2007, Rajiva came over, we had arranged some meetings, and when the meetings were over, Rajiva, while sort of munching on a chocolate cake, said, "Dan, you do know you're going to be fired, don't you?" I said, "Why?" He said, "No, you're much too successful." So, well, in that sense, he was way ahead of the game. But seriously, no, I didn't, and I'll tell you why. Because the running of foreign policy, especially as concerns strategic locations such as Geneva, was by the president. My equation was with President Mahinda Rajapaksa.
So you're saying that you didn't report to the foreign minister? You reported?
No, I didn't report to the foreign minister. I didn't trust the foreign ministry, and I didn't even trust the Minister of Human Rights, because as the WikiLeaks showed, he was talking out of turn to the US Embassy. So my equation was with the president. The president picked me to go to Geneva. He sent me in 2007 on a delegation to scout the place before I was appointed ambassador. He brought me back. He had a one-on-one, and he said, "Look, do you think we can handle it?" I said yes, and he asked me how, and I spelled out my strategy, and he endorsed it. And I went back there and kept in touch with him, not often, not frequently, but regularly. And a few days before the vote in Geneva in 2009, I remember calling him and saying, "Look, I have just one problem. The minister at that time, Minister of Human Rights, is turning up, and I don't want these guys working behind my back. If you can make sure that doesn't happen, I'll win this for Sri Lanka. It can be done." And the president at that time, he said something which I can't repeat on television. It was a kind of a four-letter word, and he said, "Look, I won't allow that so-and-so to do anything behind your back. You go ahead and do what you have to do." And we won that one. Now, Mahinda Rajapaksa hasn't changed as a human being, but the set of power relations, the matrix in which he is embedded now, is very different from the institutional power relations that prevailed during his first term, which also corresponded pretty much to the period of the war. After the war, in the post-war period, President Rajapaksa has become a prisoner of his own fortress. The fortress that may have protected him during the war, a family-centric or clan-centric power structure, I call it an oligarchy, and its courtiers, its courtesans, and so on. That is the power structure. They lie to him, they spin, they take orders from the most powerful institution in the state, which is the Ministry of Defense and the defense bureaucracy. And President Rajapaksa, I believe, from my own interactions with him a few months ago, still has his intuition. He's sharp when it comes to international questions. He figured out how many votes we were going to get in Geneva when we lost, and we had bet about a week before. But the establishment or the machine runs the place. The machine uses him as a vote-getting vacuum cleaner because he is a warm personality who has achieved a great deal for the country in restoring peace and winning the war. And the policy loop runs rather differently from the way it ran during the time I served in Geneva, and we were fighting the war, and it was his first term. Now, if I may follow up on what I read from the Times London, we know from WikiLeaks that a cable went from the US Embassy in Paris in 2009 to the State Department in Washington, D.C. It was a cable that summarized the discussion, including on Sri Lanka, between Clint Williamson, the ambassador at large on war crimes of the United States of America, and Christian Bernier, the chief of international penal tribunals of the French Foreign Ministry, the Quai d'Orsay. And they discussed Sri Lanka. This is July 16th, 2009, 6 weeks after we had won in Geneva. And the conclusion was, look, I mean, we couldn't do what we set out to do because, and I quote, because of the very effective diplomacy of the Sri Lankan representation in Geneva, unquote. Now, what that shows, most importantly, is that they were trying to get us on war crimes. It's not because we didn't implement the LLRC, because there was no LLRC. Okay. If we had implemented it, we could have defended ourselves better. But they were trying to get us at that time, and they concluded in their discussion in Paris that it was our very effective diplomacy in Geneva that prevented that. Now the irony, the bitter irony, Nadeem, is that on that same day, 2009, July 16, when the Americans and the French, the heads of their respective war crimes divisions, were talking about Sri Lanka and were talking about our effective diplomacy in Geneva, which prevented the war crimes investigation, on that day in Cairo at the Non-Aligned Summit, President Rajapaksa was prevailed upon, or took it upon himself, to fire me. Because that is the day, July 16th, 2009, when I was getting a sort of a left-handed compliment from Sri Lanka's critics or foes or whatever you want to call it, competitors in Paris, I was removed by a fax, not called back for consultations, never told what I had done wrong, not cross-posted to another place, but I was fired. Now, I don't think
so
it was personal.
Professor Vijay Singh would have seemed quite like a prophet.
Oh, absolutely. So, I think that wasn't purely personal, and it may not have also been...
Dr. Jayatilaga, I'd like to ask you this. Now, Ambassador Kurunayakam says that she was instructed to follow the non-aligned policy.
Yeah.
We are part of the non-aligned movement. We follow the non-aligned policy. That has been our foreign policy, and it has served us well over the years. But she also says at the same time that a certain group were negotiating with the United States, with Washington.
Yeah.
Did you ever have to negotiate with Washington?
I didn't have to. I always did. We always talked to the U.S. In Geneva, and Rajiva might remember that when they came from Colombo, just before the decisive vote, and they were very tired. It's been a long flight. I said, "Look, we're talking to the Americans," and I told Mohan Peiris, who is now our Chief Justice, "Look, Mohan, will you take over that conversation? Because you come from Colombo, you know what's acceptable to Colombo and not." Now, there's nothing wrong with dialoguing with the United States, but you have to do so while being very sure of who you are and who your real allies are. And our real allies were our friends in the region, the whole region, South Asia, India chiefly, but not only India, Pakistan as well, and the non-aligned movement. We were very sure of ourselves. We had built a huge alliance, which is why we got almost 2/3 of the vote. And then, when you have that strength, when you know what your policy is, what you're not going to give into, what you are ready to accept, what your core interests are, then in fact you should be dialoguing with the United States. The US is not our enemy. We have a contradiction with the United States over the UN War Crimes Inquiry and some other issues. That's a contradiction. It's a tactical contradiction. They're not our enemies. We don't have any country that is our enemy, Nadeem. We have enemies in the international arena, and those enemies are trans-state, sub-state actors, or non-state actors. Mainly the same guys who fought a war against us, who want a separate state in the northern east of Sri Lanka, who are lobbying the West. And that lobbying has been effective because of the failures of Sri Lankan diplomacy. So Lakshman Kadurgama talked to the Americans all the time. But that was within the non-aligned policy.
Yes, Ambassador.
Yeah. I think we have to make clear, we're talking about different things. When Diane was in Geneva, that was a special session on Sri Lanka. It was not the Human Rights Council general session. So there was a meeting, they were discussing Sri Lanka, and there was going to be action, some kind of action, that this session would have to take because it was on Sri Lanka. So he had to negotiate. And the session was called by primarily Western countries with some of their Latin American allies, mostly. In the case of the Human Rights Council session that I was at, it was a general session, and there was no need for Sri Lanka to accept the resolution. It was moved by the US, and we could negotiate or not. But I agree with him that you have to negotiate. There are moments you can negotiate, but you always negotiate from a position of strength, never from a position of weakness.
Right.
In his case, at the special session, he would have had to negotiate, maybe.
No, I
don't know.
We always kept
but he did negotiate. But I didn't have to negotiate.
Really using words that said, strangely, I think Dan is perfectly correct. You must always dialogue. You must talk to people, find out what their problems are.
Dialogue is okay.
Negotiation in the UN sense is a very special thing.
We didn't really.
Tamara was absolutely correct to say she didn't negotiate, and Dan did exactly the same in 2007, because in 2006, long before Dan went there was a resolution on the table placed by the British, and when Dan went there, I remember him telling me, the chap came and said, let's negotiate, and Dan said, I'm not negotiating.
Yeah. I didn't even look at it, I turned the piece of paper
because
around.
as Tamara did herself told you, you don't look at the paper, that gives the message that you're interested in negotiation. What Dan did is built up an alliance, and Tamara, as she did in 2011, did exactly that, and then this whole business was undermined. I think one very significant factor which Dan may have forgotten, and it shows the mindset in some elements in the foreign ministry, was that Dan was asked to invite the president to take over the leadership of the G17 group. And Dan asked me to ask the president, who was very enthusiastic.
That's right.
And then there was no reply. So I called the president. He said, no, the foreign minister said, that's a group of jokers. No need to take that chairmanship. So I said, but that's India, Brazil, BRICS. And the president said,
Algeria.
Ahmed. So I said, why don't you accept it? And then he said to me, no, you talk to the foreign minister. And I'm afraid I was a bit rude. I said, your foreign minister doesn't know anything. He said, but he is my foreign minister.
That wasn't GL. That was...
No, this was Bogolagama. Yeah. I have to say, when I called Mr. Bogolagama, he was marvelous. He had no idea. When I told him, he said, that's the case, I'll recommend it at once. Now later I thought, who was it who had advised Bogolagama wrong? And then I realized all roads in terms of the villainy lead, not to GL, who was not there at the time, GL would have been taken in equally, Shenuka. Shenuka having come back from London where
But can I just finish? Shenuka was not the foreign secretary at the time.
No, she was his advisor on the... She was his... Don't forget...
in charge of UN.
And don't forget that Mr. Bogolanga and Mr. Kohana were not the best of friends. He relied on her. And she had, then leaving London in 2008, she said, I will be taking over from Dan next year.
It was in the Asian Tribune. In 2008, and never contradicted, Walter Jayawardena wrote a piece for the Asian Tribune that Shenuka, addressing a staff meeting in London, said, Dharanjaya is going to be thrown out and I'm going to be succeeding him. This was 1 year before it happened. So she was obviously either instrumental in or part of a loop that made sure that change took place.
So, as I said, Mr. Bogolagama had accepted this, but he changed. Mr. Bogolagama was always someone willing to learn. And he wasn't frightened to listen. Now, Shenuka having come back and taken charge of the UN, as Dan said, actually led to him being dismissed after 2 years. He got a letter saying your contract will not be renewed. Fortunately, the president intervened and extended his contract for 1 year and then sacked him in July.
Before the special session. Because if that had happened, and it was in the Island wrote an editorial commending the president for retaining me. If the conspiracy had worked, when the special session came online, I wouldn't have been there. And even if my successor had taken over, you don't know what the strategy would have been. There might not have been a successor in that short period of time. This was in the first quarter of 2009, when we were in serious danger in Geneva.
So that was happening even then. And then, Iltahan said he was removed in July, but of course I told him it was his fault because he had been so successful that the people in Colombo thought any fool will succeed. So they promptly appointed any fool. They have not bothered to think about a strategy. In fact, Tamara once mentioned that when she pointed out this resolution in September, the foreign ministry was not interested in it. And when she asked what the strategy was, Sajin Vasco said there's no strategy, the president never has any strategy, he changes it all the time. But to give the president his due, when she spoke to him, he had been very clear about his instructions in September 2011. But by March 2012, the whole thing was a mess. Tamara was sidelined.
Ms. Kurunagam, you were there in March 2012, from September 2011 to March 2000. You were serving there. Is that true? Did you not have a strategy? Was there no strategy to deal with?
In September, when I discovered that there was this draft resolution, I had prepared a document based on my discussions in Geneva with other ambassadors, a strategy paper, if you like. I proposed, it's not a question of we take a position or we don't take a position, but what do we do, how do we build our alliances, and also putting it into context.
Well, how do you form a bulwark against forces that are working against you?
So you have to identify, first of all, you have to understand what your enemy is trying to do. What is their objective? And their objective, for me, it was extremely clear. The objective was not human rights in Sri Lanka. It had to do with larger interests that Washington has globally. And Sri Lanka happens to be on a strategic maritime corridor. And so that's where this interest with Sri Lanka lies. And how do they get in? But more globally, in the international scene, the US has been moving with its allies, trying to get an international norm accepted called the responsibility to protect, which will legitimize unilateral intervention. That is, a single country decides to intervene in the internal affairs of country, as they did in Yugoslavia, as they did in Iraq, as they're doing in Syria, in Libya, etc. So this will be yet another precedent. So this was the whole. Their strategy was to move towards establishing this norm, responsibility to protect. And Sri Lanka was an easy target because we had isolated ourselves from our allies. So I informed the ministry about it. So in that context, there was a common interest. The developing countries, it was in their interest also to take up the question of Sri Lanka and to prevent any such move or adoption of such a resolution. Because if you look at every single resolution, we are moving towards this, where they are setting up a case to demonstrate that the Sri Lankan government or the state of Sri Lanka is not capable or is unwilling to protect its own citizens. That's what they're trying to show. So they show what happened in 2009. They start with the last period of the war, and then they go on to say, well, things are happening now. So which means not only were you unable to protect your citizens before, but since it's going on now, it means that you can't do it now either because of the impunity. And if you can't protect your citizens now, then you will not be able to protect them in the future. So this is the case that they were developing, and we allowed them to do that because we continued by targeting people inside, whether it's Muslims or arrests, the media, and so on. So we had to be out there in Geneva and try to defend Sri Lanka in that context also. So it was a very difficult situation, and so I wrote to the ministry explaining this and explaining what was going on and whom we should ally with, and how we should proceed with this. And I didn't get a response from here. So that is why I came to Colombo, despite the instructions not to come, and I spoke to the president. He said, you come. And I came here to exactly to have an exchange about the strategy and to get clear instructions. So I proposed a strategy. But on this end, as Rajiva says, at that meeting
what happened when you came to Colombo? What was the strategy that you formulated after coming to Colombo? You say you came to Colombo to exchange ideas and get it clear.
It was based on a document that I had prepared, which I said how we should go about it. Identify common interests with the developing countries, because that's where we know where it's coming from, the resolution. It's coming from Washington and its allies. So that's very clear. So we know that we are not going to win their votes. Europeans vote as a bloc. You will have the sympathies of maybe some of the European countries, and they were sympathetic, but they vote as a bloc. So if there is a European decision, they will go along with it, even if they may not agree with it necessarily. So that's clear. They have a bloc vote. Now we have to get our support together. Now, even if you want to negotiate, you have to negotiate from a strong position. But when there's nothing to negotiate, when the resolution says this is what we want to have an investigation, or we are leading towards an investigation, some form of external intervention, then we have to be very clear what it is we want to, if we want to negotiate or not. So so this was very clear to me. So we have to build alliances. Africa, Asia, Latin America. Where were we weak? We were weak especially in Africa, especially Francophone countries, because we don't speak the language, and we're not interested in the French because we don't speak their language. So the whole half of Africa we ignored. Then Latin America, we don't speak Spanish. But not only that, it's just not the language. They consider those poor countries. So there is in the foreign ministry, it's an elite. It's a Colombo-based elite from the elite schools. So they have they identify themselves fully with the Western countries. They send their children to London or to Washington or Canada or US or Canadian schools or Australian schools. They don't send them to the continent, European continent, nor do they send their children to Africa, nor do they send them to Latin America. They will go to India, possibly Singapore.
I'd like to get back on track. You came to Colombo on the instructions of the president. What did you do in Colombo? What was the strategy?
So I met with I had submitted my strategy. I met with the foreign minister first in his office, and there was in the office there was Sajin Vaz present, and the secretary Amunugama, he was also present, and at least half an hour the minister gave me a long lecture about how I had violated the rules of the foreign ministry to come to Colombo despite clear instructions not to come. And I listened to him.
But you had been instructed by the president.
I did say the president had asked me to come, but they were not listening to that. And then he went on, and at the end of half an hour I said, Minister, can I now come to the point why I came here? Because there are important things happening out there. And I've sent a document here, I've sent you a proposal, I haven't had any response from you. I want to know what the government strategy is. It's not my strategy. I have given my opinion based on the information I got on the field, on the ground. So now it's the government to define what they want us to do. We are only serving the country.
And his response was?
And he didn't respond. It was Sajid who piped up. He said, we don't have a strategy. So, there is no strategy. The president changes his strategy all the time. So that was the response I got. Professor Pires didn't say anything. The only thing he said was, now he turned to the secretary and he said, arrange for her to go back tonight. I arrived the previous day. It was a weekend. That was a Friday, and he wanted me to go back on that day. I was seeing the president on the weekend. I was leaving on the Sunday. And I told him, no, I'm not leaving until I see the president, because I've come here on his instructions, and he is going to see me. Then he said, no, president doesn't want to see you. And I said, how come? I just spoke to him this morning, and he said he wanted to see me this weekend. And then he turned to Amunugama and said, no, you have to get her the ticket to send her back today. And then as we finished the meeting, we stood up. The security outside his door, standing outside his door, had a call from on his phone. And then he came into the office and said, temple trees for Madam Kulanaikam. And that was, on the other side, was Lalit Veeratungu saying, President wants to have breakfast with you tomorrow morning. Can you come? So, but despite that, Pires told Amunugama, you have to arrange for her to go back. Of course, I didn't. I had the breakfast with the president the next day.
Gentlemen, what does this portray? It seems like a whole mess. Professor Vijay Singh, what is going on?
Complete paranoia. I think you may have seen that recently the same thing happened to Chris Nonis, because one of the claims in the so-called account of Sajjan Vascon's thing is he thought he had a direct line to president. I can't tolerate any of that. Poor Chris was also, I think, upset because, after Dan and I, there was really nobody who could probably deal with the Western media. And in fact, Gotabaya Rajapaksa invited him to speak at the defense seminar. He's like a red rag to that pair of bulls now. Someone else is being taken seriously. I told you the president once told me, when GLC is another professor, he gets frightened. Anyone who talks to the president direct, they get frightened of. So that is why poor Chris also was got rid of. Here is a man, I think one of the ministers had said, now we have a good foreign minister in waiting. Chris had dealt so well with the media. I think the Sri Lankan public is starved, They used to cheer the interviews Dan and I did. Tamara's performances, she hardly had time to do them. But there was no one until Chris. So there's this paranoia. One of the ministers said to me, he's psychopathic. Now there was an attempt by one of the ministers to arrange meetings for MPs to discuss foreign policy. The meetings were stopped. So I asked Dinesh Gunawar, the chief government who had arranged this, why have you stopped all this? The minister stopped it. I said, why? No, he told me don't have the meetings if I am not here, and he won't give us any dates. In fact, one day we were discussing Russia, Amudagama came, I said, aren't we meeting? No, the minister said not to. The Ambassador Rajapaksa unfortunately made the mistake of asking me to do some position papers. I think that terrified GLPs. Tamara's position paper is actually a thoughtful strategy. Now, when you have a man who really can't use his intellect to produce a synthesis, he's a good speaker, but he can lecture well. That's what the diplomats say. He calls us here and lectures us. There's no dialogue. There's no discussion. So when he finds people who can produce a paper, people who can respond to interviews, he panics. And unfortunately, he also has someone else who wants complete control of the president. But I think the real problem is both of them are manipulated by someone who has another agenda. Shanuka's discussions with the West. I think Tamara said how she had appealed obviously to the Israeli ambassador. I think immediately after the Geneva defeat in 2012, one of her groupies wrote an article saying this proves who our real friends are. Now the real friends have just brought a motion criticizing us. But there was an article by someone whose husband in the foreign service and what I call a Shanuka groupie, who said the real problem was Dan and Tamara and Raju because they kept attacking the West. But these are our real friends. So if we, roll over and allow them to do whatever they want to us, then they'll be our real friends. And the president, unfortunately, also gives in to all this. So we're going to be defenseless, and I find it irritating that the victory, and don't forget there were two victories in 2009. One was the great achievement of the forces, the second was the diplomatic victory. And it is wrong of the president to fling it away, to discard it and allow ourselves to get into danger.
Yeah.
Simply because of personal predilections and because he's allowed himself to become the prisoner of people who don't care a damn for Sri Lanka.
I don't fully agree with what Rajiv is saying.
You never do.
What also Diane is also implying. I don't think that this reflects a kind of chaos, and it's
I don't think so either.
It's not. It's because he's imprisoned in his own prison. I think there is. It's very coherent with a domestic policy that has been carried out by those in power.
And this is the thing. I have a tough time accepting the fact that we are pandering to, or that the strong elements in the foreign ministry are pandering to Western powers when, in the media or anywhere else, even in the state media, if you look at it, or all of the time you're hearing of Western conspiracy.
Yeah. I have my own version.
But
I'm sure you'll get around to
yeah, I'll come to you, Dr. Jayatha, in a moment. But please do finish.
Yeah. No. So what I think it's very coherent with what's going on domestically. It's not. We are not focusing on advancing the interests of the people inside the country. The economic policies and the financial policies are oriented to the interests of a particular group, small group of people, and the foreign policy that is being conducted is also in line with the interests of that same group. And I think at the end, after the end of the war, don't forget, during the 30-year war, there were a whole, well, you can say, group that developed in arms trafficking, or there were arms contractors, and it was a totally different situation of an underground that developed during that period. On the one side, you have the LTT and their involvement inside the country, but also outside, and where they were collecting money. And on the other side, you had also in the rest of Sri Lanka, they created a condition where trafficking was, people were making money out of trafficking, and there were those who had a vested interest in the war continuing. So I think during this period when there were changes that took place, and the president needed to fight the war, he needed to get support from all groups, bring them all together, there was a new situation that was created, and they are the ones who emerged later on in the post-war period. And the foreign policy, because otherwise you cannot explain why what would be considered by the people as a defeat. I mean, you see it as a defeat, what's happening there, but I'm not so sure that those who were out there in Geneva, with whom I had a problem, considered it a defeat. It was not a defeat for them, because that's what they wanted, I think. And that's what they wanted because it helped them, because they were not working in the interest of the people, but they were working in the interest of somebody else outside there. And I think that's what happened. And they were holding negotiations, and maybe they were making deals. I don't know what kind of deals, but there were deals being made. How do you explain, for instance, that the European Union lifted sanctions on the LTT? They lifted the ban on the LTT, and we obviously didn't do anything to stop it. So why? There must be some explanation. So I think it's just there's more than just individuals, incompetency, a president who is not in control, or I don't know, he's not the minister.
And you must remember, if I may add to that, a very effective ambassador in Brussels was recalled just before the ban was lifted, Mr. Amsa. He was recalled.
So there are things that are not very clear.
Right?
Maybe we don't really see everything now. I think what we see is just the tip of the iceberg, and I think with the audit report, it's exactly the same thing. I think that audit report hides a lot of things. I think we are going to find out if they do go actually into that report, they will know exactly probably how all the other embassies function, and who is in whose interests.
I'll come to the audit report in just a moment, the whole Geneva Gate controversy. But Dr. Jayathilaka, we were talking about the foreign policy and how, on the face of it doesn't appear that we are pandering to the West. Because I mean, what's being sold to the masses is that we are a pro-Eastern country.
I don't think we are pandering to the West. No, I don't think so at all. Even the oligarchy or the cartel that runs Sri Lanka now would be better served by having a decent relationship with India, which would help them get the West off their back. I mean, you can have exactly the same domestic structure, exactly the same set of domestic policies, with a different foreign policy. But these guys are just not smart enough. It's not a question of the domestic policy. Look at Myanmar. Myanmar was under pressure, terrible pressure, from the West. But now Barack Obama just visited recently. That's because it evolved on its own. It understood, even the military understood, that it was in its interest to open up. I mentioned the Myanmar option when the Darusman report came online. I was saying this, I was writing this, I was saying, look, there's a way out of this. The Myanmar foreign minister was my colleague in Geneva, so I know how they strategized it. They got out of that encirclement. And that was used, that was a charge against me. I was even asked by the president, you had said this about Myanmar. I said, yes, I said Myanmar because I wanted to show that there is an internal and endogenous way of getting out of an encirclement. Look at Zimbabwe. Heaven forbid that we regard it as a model internally. But nothing has changed internally in Zimbabwe. You don't hear about Zimbabwe anymore. The West was gunning for Zimbabwe. You don't hear about Zimbabwe anymore. You hear more about Sri Lanka. Why? Is it because there's been a change domestically in Zimbabwe? No. Because they were practical and realistic enough to leverage their relationship with South Africa. And South Africa is being used as a buffer. South Africa has told the West, look, we'll take care of this. This is regional. So, my problem is that, not that we don't have a foreign policy which is very progressive or in the interest of the people. I don't think foreign policy needs to be in the interest of the people. I'm looking for foreign policy that's in the rational interest of the Sri Lankan state as a country. And I don't see that. What has happened is that Sri Lanka's foreign policy, which has had a certain continuity with some changes, a continuity of non-alignment, good relations with India, has undergone a shift. Now, we had this kind of situation in the 1980s when we deviated from our traditional non-aligned stand under President Jawahar, and more particularly under the influence of National Security Minister Lalithathirat Mudali. We sundered our relationship with India and we wound up with 70,000 foreign troops on our soil. We are repeating that cycle for the same reasons. We are making the same mistake, and the mistake has nothing to do with domestic policy. It is to do with the mindset, the ideology of the regime, and what the two of you being old Thomians would recognize from the study of the classics, of the ethos, the dominant ethos that characterizes the regime. And we remember that Aristotle categorized or classified regimes according to their dominant ethos. The dominant ethos of Sri Lanka, of the Sri Lankan regime in the post-war period, not during the wartime, not in the first term of the president, but in the post-war period, has been one of neo-isolationism. It has not been a realistic foreign policy. The ethos is one of triumphalism, and the regime has become even more oligarchic and clan-centered than before. Because it is clan-centric, family-centric, clan-centric, you do not promote or permit a meritocracy. So you do not have the best and the brightest as your ambassadors, as your foreign policy advisor to the president, as your monitoring MP. You have stooges and thugs and mediocrities. Because what counts is not whether you're good or not, whether you have succeeded or not, but whether you stooge the ruling family or not, and whether you have a patron in the ruling family who can say, look, he's our guy or she's our gal, and we'll make her the foreign secretary or the presidential advisor on international relations. So what you have is a hollowing out of the state, a decline of the Sri Lankan state, and that is why we are losing the Cold War, having won the Hot War. And the result of this will be the destruction of the Sri Lankan state if we proceed along these lines, and the rollback of the splendid triumph that the Sri Lankan Armed Forces obtained for us in 2009.
Now, can I just say that there was slightly simplistic view you took of pandering. You were talking about state pandering. I was talking of Shenuka per se. Like I said, I don't think GLOs have been understand whom they're pandering to, except themselves. But I think the common factor is something that Dan actually stressed. Shenuka has been very anti-Indian. Attempts to poison the president's mind against Sushma Swaraj, stopping that meeting. Lavit Veeratunga had to rescue that. There's been a deliberate attack on India, efforts to actually pervert what India is doing on her part. That is unfortunately shared by what Dan would describe as the defense establishment, because they are not prepared to recognize that while India was absolutely solid with us in fighting against terrorism in the last decade or two, they also have a need to assuage not only their own constituencies, but the Tamil parties here tend to look to India. Maybe they shouldn't do that. But the simple fact is there were commitments by the president freely entered into.
Yeah.
There are people now trying to criticize that. He agreed with India, not 13 which India wanted, but 13 plus. He agreed with Ban Ki-moon to do certain things. And you can't go around, I mean, there are people who say that the president, having said this, said, we fooled them again. I don't think the president said that. I think that's more people around him who have stopped him. But you cannot make promises you do not keep. Now that common factor, which is shared by, I think, all those around the president, is the greatest disaster. Now with regard to the West, I'm certainly against giving in to their attempts to take away from our sovereignty. But I also think that the West has occasionally put very clear points to us about areas in which we can do better. And when those are put politely, as with the Kerry report, we just ignored it.
The Kerry-Lugar report.
The Kerry-Lugar report, it made some very valid points. And we did nothing about it.
There was a deal on the table in the Kerry-Lugar report, bipartisan report, which was basically, we'll put accountability on the back burner if you move ahead on devolution. We spurned that. Our viewers, look, the Americans are coming round because we are so great, we won, they've learned their lesson. I mean, nothing can you imagine it. In Colombo, in this regime, there's a sense that you can eyeball it with Washington DC and you can also eyeball it with Delhi. This is a pathology, this is crazy.
But the president on both these cases, that the LLRC instructed action to be taken. Now, I think that was genuine, and there are people who tell me I'm fooled by his acting. But I think in all those cases, the president gave genuine instructions to do A, B, C, which were completely flouted by people around him, who seemed to think, as Diane said, that their allegiance is to others.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid the president is no longer capable, which he was in the first part, of making sure that his instructions are followed.
Yeah.
And I think that is his tragedy.
His instructions are undermined in some cases.
No, I want to come back on what has been said. I think the reason those people who are the most anti-Indian are also those who are the most pro-Washington. And I come back now now we're speaking about the foreign ministry, we're speaking about particular people out there. If you hear how they address the question of the Human Rights Council and say who is really attacking us, who is behind us, who is behind the resolution, they don't speak about Washington. It's 2012 it was fault of India because India didn't support us. No, it was not the fault of India. It was Washington that moved the resolution, it was the Western countries that backed it, and it was Mahinda Samarasinghe who went and messed it up by making it public that India is backing Sri Lanka when we were told not to make that public statement because it would create problems in Tamil Nadu, which is exactly what happened. So it was the problem was not India. It was the real issue was Washington and others. They hid that. It was an anti-India bashing event afterwards. Then who else was responsible? It's not, when they don't speak about the Office of the High Commissioner, who is behind the Office of the High Commissioner. No, it's Navi Pillai. And Navi Pillai happens to be Tamil. So then they go at Navi Pillai. Today they don't have a Navi Pillai or a Tamil there, they have a Jordanian. You don't hear them speak about the Jordanian. Now they speak about the staff.
They do speak about
yes, but they speak more about the staff.
Ambassador Singh very famously
Yes, but no. They speak about the staff of OHCHR. They don't speak about the individual. Navi Pillai was targeted because she's Tamil. Then they speak about the Tamil diaspora. Now, when it has to defend Ture Raja, then this poor guy
It's interesting that you say the staff, because just at a media briefing convened today, the Minister of External Affairs, Professor G.L. Peiris, went on about Rupert Colville.
Is the Minister of External Affairs is such a hypocrite. Because after 2012, Tamara found a document which showed bad faith in a particular individual who has displayed bad faith throughout. Navi Pillai herself, although she was quite tough, generally tried to be fair. You could always talk to her.
Yeah.
When Tamara questioned this, Colombo actually repudiated her question. You remember that?
Yeah.
You know, it was outrageous. Here is Tamara finding out bad faith there. And having addressed the question, she was let down here. Now again,
your successor withdrew that.
Yeah. And you know, Chenuka has actually got to the stage of withdrawing things. Aruni Devaraja, Vijayavardhana told me that is totally unprofessional, and that's when she told me that Chenuka got in through the back door into the foreign ministry. Because she just does not understand that there are certain norms. Now here, when there was actual evidence of bad faith, similarly when the Darusman report came out, I did a long list of questions showing that they were also trying to attack what I call the good guys in the UN. Many people in the UN worked with us very well in Sri Lanka. Completely ignored by the foreign ministry. What happened a year later, they published the Petri report showing that they were also attacking the UN staff in Sri Lanka who worked with us during the war. That letter is still there where I asked 15 questions which I told Amunugama to address. Without discussing things, and we have a very good UN representative here, you raise issues with him, he'll respond. Either they get people to go and do demonstrations and pretend nae apikale nae. Everyone knows it, Vimal Virans will go and demonstrate where he gets his instructions from. Then they shout at people. What they don't do is engage in civilized discussion with facts. For instance, there's something called the third narrative which points out discrepancies. You must point those discrepancies out. You know, what did government do when the Darusman report came out? Basil wrote one book, Gotabe wrote another book saying how wonderful they are. Gotabe did not address the issues. He called me in at the end. I said, these are good narratives. It should have come out 2 years ago. But why are you not answering the questions? Which you can do. Then I said, someone has to do it. You're not publishing this book, just you're publishing because of Darusman. No, I have told the Chief of Staff to do it. Chief of Defence Staff was not given any funds to do it, so nothing happened. So there is no attempt to engage in discussion. I think Dan's point was you must engage with people. You don't need to give in to them.
You can debate.
But what we do is we either shout at people or we get someone else to shout and say, Apine vehicle, fooling nobody. And we're left in this complete mess.
But also I think we have been constantly on the defensive. That is, I agree with you that we have to give information to show what is being done inside the country. But since Washington is not really interested in what's going on inside the country, but they have other objectives, then we have to do more than that. Then we have to, because we are not going to mobilize our allies outside on, no, we didn't kill, we only killed 50 and not 200. It's not, that's not what's going to mobilize them. The moment you understand that their interest in taking up the Sri Lankan issue is defending sovereignty, for instance, against all unilateral intervention, then you will get much broader support.
I don't think that the Sri Lankan regime and the power wielders are pro-Washington DC. I think they don't understand Washington DC. I mean, Sajin Vasugunathan is sent as the main interlocutor with Washington DC. He doesn't understand the United States. He doesn't understand Washington DC. What the government, what the regime thinks, and what it has thought for a long time, and I say this with personal knowledge, is that the bad guy is Barack Obama, the bad guys are the Democrats, and they thought in 2008 that Obama was going to lose in 2008 and John McCain was going to win. This is the Sri Lankan foreign ministry, the foreign minister at that time. And their betting was that the race card, quote unquote, would be played. And then in the re-election of Barack Obama, they thought that the Israeli strategy of undermining Obama in the United States through AIPAC was going to succeed. They think that they can cultivate the Republicans and the Pentagon and the Jewish lobby, and that eventually the Democrats are going to go away and you're going to have a hardline Republican administration which will admire the fact that Sri Lanka is now ready to fight Islamic terrorism, which doesn't exist in Sri Lanka. And this is the mindset. This mindset of trying to mimic Tel Aviv is just completely irrational, because the Republicans are going to be even harder on Sri Lanka because the Republicans are more anti-Chinese than the Democrats, and they are also very, very concerned about the attacks on the evangelicals that this government has allowed to happen. So it's not pro-Washington. It's a neoconservative mindset. It is isolationist. Professor Pires has fallen in line with that. when he says we are not defending ourselves in the European court because they have no jurisdiction over us. You don't need to have jurisdiction when you defend yourself in an international arena. This is the ideology of thinking that we are Israel, that we don't have to answer to anybody, that we don't have to defend ourselves because we are some sort of chosen people, and that the Chinese are going to help us, which the Chinese are not, because the Chinese are very prudent, very pragmatic people, and the Chinese are not going to get into any kind of dispute with India on India's doorstep when Sri Lanka acts in a way that is perceived by Delhi as at variance with its strategic interests. So this is to do with an ideology of neoconservative isolationism. That is the dominant ideology of the defense bureaucracy, which drives policy, local and foreign, in Sri Lanka in the post-war period, and which even vetoes what the president occasionally tries to do of a more pragmatic.
About the alarm that has been raised by the audit report that was exposed by JVP Councillor Mr. Vasanta Samarasinha. Mr. Kurunayakam, you went to Geneva in 2011. I remember when you came on our segment Newsline, you said that you wanted to start with a clean desk, and therefore you called for all of these old files to be brought up, and you didn't want to have problems from the previous steward to be passed down to you. What aroused your suspicions and made you call for this report? Just to refresh our memories very quickly.
Well, there are a number. First of all, when you take on a new responsibility, you take on from the day you assume it. So you don't take on responsibility of things that happen, for responsibility for problems that took place before. So when I arrived, I started looking at some of the files, but particularly I started with the inventory, and that was in the official residence itself, because I had also had my own things which I had been moving around, because as you know I lived in Geneva and I had all my own furniture with me, so I was moving with all that to Brazil, to Cuba, and I came to Geneva, and then I found, and I asked for the inventory of the official residence so that things are very clear, and I found that there were things missing in that inventory, and then I found things that were in the inventory that were not in the house, and vice versa. And the same thing I found in the office, in my office in the mission itself. And so when I asked an explanation from my colleagues why this particular furniture was there or not there, they explained to me, well, what you see on that inventory as a sofa is actually this table here, and I said, no, but that table is not a sofa, and it should be a table instead. So, well, no, but that's how we have done it. That's how it is here. I said, but it shouldn't be like that. So I started to look, because I found that there were problems with it. Then I also discovered that the house had been renovated, and I looked through the file. When I was looking through all these files, I found that there were 3 quotations normal. I mean, that's the tender procedure, but it didn't tally, because there was one quotation had to do with painting this particular wall, and the other one had to do with something else, and then you couldn't compare them. And that's
3 different quotations for 3 different jobs.
Right, and the one actually that was awarded the contract was a company that was a finance company, and not from Geneva, but 350 kilometers away. Geneva is a big city with lots of construction companies. So that raised my curiosity. Why was it given to them? I looked through the quotation very carefully, and I find it's really not even really a quotation. It recommended that the mission be moved elsewhere. And here this was a quotation on the renovating the residence, not the mission. And then I also have been told by Sri Lankans who contacted me when I was there, who were living in Switzerland, as you know, the ambassador there is also Consul General for Switzerland. Although the mission doesn't cover Switzerland, that's covered from Germany, but Consular Affairs is with the mission. And so I was contacted by some Sri Lankans. I said, do you know so-and-so, the owner of this company, has been questioned or taken in for LTT, suspicion of activities which are LTT related. So then at the same time, I discover that the house, the official residence, was being watched. I had been receiving threats, anonymous letters, Then I saw that the house was, official residence was being watched. I contacted the Swiss police, and the Swiss police confirmed that the house is being observed. They were sending a patrol around, and then I asked them to check, because I was looking at the residence. I thought if this company was involved, maybe they would have bugged the house.
Yes. Ms. Kurunayakam, you highlighted two concerns, a security concern and of course the financial irregularities. The security concern, then you immediately came back to Colombo and you met with the president, whereupon you requested that these two sweeps be carried out, that an audit be carried out, and that an electronic sweep be carried out at the mission. What happened from there on?
Well, when I spoke to the president about it, I was here for the National Day. He immediately acted. Immediately he picked up the phone, he talked to P.B. Jayasundara, and he said, send an audit team. He didn't ask the foreign minister to do it. I told him not to have the foreign ministry because they wouldn't come out with an objective report. So, and the president decided that it would be the finance ministry, and then he also arranged a meeting for me with the defense secretary to discuss the security matter. So I did meet with the defense secretary. That wasn't followed up, but a few days later there was the audit team that came, and they conducted their investigations. They had all the files with them, and they came up obviously with the report. But this was just before the Human Rights Council. That was in March. I think they came towards mid-February, and they returned to Sri Lanka. I haven't heard anything since then. I didn't hear from them because during the Human Rights Council session, or towards the end of it, I had been removed already from my functions. I was not aware of it. I discovered it after the end of the session when there was no mail coming to me, and when I asked the personal assistant why I was not getting any mail, she said, well, there's been a fax from Colombo, and it's now the number 2 who is in charge, and this was new to me. And so I didn't get any. If it was sent to the mission, the audit report, I haven't seen it.
Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe, in Parliament, do you not have a responsibility to ensure that this report sees the light of day, that it becomes public?
Well, Parliament certainly has a responsibility. Unfortunately, two problems. One is that financial oversight belongs to two committees. Our committee, COPE and
PAC, and the public.
Under Due Gunasekara functions very well, has issued a lot of reports. The PAC is actually a joke. Mr. Sumantaran once said, what's the point of these committees? No quorum. I said, talk for yourself. We had never not met because of a quorum. I mean, today, we had a very good meeting. In fact, Due Gunasekara has moved to what he calls a practical audit. COPE hardly meets. It also, I'm afraid I wrote about this to two members of COPE. Mr. Vasudevananayakaru didn't
the PAC. Sorry, not COPE,
the
PAC.
I said, why don't you ask for this report? Vasu didn't even reply, but maybe he doesn't look at emails. Sumantaran said he'll bring it up, but I haven't asked him what he followed. I said, you have a right to ask for this. In COPE, we would certainly have done it. In fact, at COPE, one of the ladies, Ms. Udharkarama, came and I discussed the report with her. And I told Mr. Gunasekara, we must actually ask for this. But the second problem is also now Saratha Murugama, the sweet man, but I mean, how can you have the Deputy Minister of Finance in charge of COPE? Now,
Public Accounts.
Public Accounts, I'm sorry. But basically, our problem is the standing orders are a mess. Now, I proposed a year ago amendments to the standing orders to give these committees more teeth, to say that the chairman should not be a government MP, which is a practice in other countries. And so the Speaker doesn't understand his own standing orders. The standing orders everyone knows needs change. The Speaker has complained and said the presidential system is bad. He wants powers back to Parliament, but he doesn't know how to get them back. So I agree, but I can't do this alone. The PAC should also be doing some work. And there is no accountability. I think they produced one report in 4 years. We produced 5. So when you have such a situation where MPs don't turn up, where there is no power with these committees, the question of parliamentary oversight is a joke.
Forget the fact that Parliament as a whole is, as you say, dysfunctional. This is a very serious report. It alleges not the opposition, not Ms. Kurunayakam, not anyone else. It's 4 government officials who have compiled this report that are alleging that the contract to refurbish the official residence of the permanent representative was awarded to a person who is possibly, according to that report, an LTT activist.
That's what the government is ducking, and this is why it's disgusting, because Professor Pires, speaking in Parliament, systematically bypasses and obfuscates the issue. The issue is not that Tamara or anybody else said that Thurayaraja is LTT and did so because they wanted to damn the Tamil diaspora or something of that sort. The link or the nexus between Mr. Thurayaraja and the LTT was surfaced, rightly or wrongly, in the audit report of Dr. P.B. Jayasundara's team, commissioned obviously by the President of Sri Lanka, who is the Minister of Finance. Page 4, I mean the Sunday Times Online has the whole document. Page 4 of the audit report, Roman numeral 4 of page 4. Halfway through the paragraph, it says, it is evident that Mr. Thurayaraja blah 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 had LTT affiliations and had been taken in for questioning or whatever. Why would 4 auditors, led by the Deputy Secretary to the Treasury, come over from Colombo to Geneva and then say that Mr. Thurayaraja, whom they have met in their lives, is somehow linked, affiliated with the LTT, unless they had evidence? It says it is evident. Obviously there was some supportive documentation. Now this is the government's own audit team, not a foreign ministry audit team, the high-powered audit team. Now the foreign minister is covering that up. That is the question that has to be asked. Your audit team said that there was a link, that it was evident that there was a link between Mr. Thurayaraja and the LTT. It's nobody else who said it. So don't sort of set up a straw man and say this is racism, or this is an attempt to besmirch the Secretary, Madam Shenuka Saniviratna. The audit team said it. Why did it say it, and what have you done with that? What happened to the investigation into the assault on Dr. Chris Nonis, which Dr. Nonis himself said was perpetrated by the monitoring MP of the MEA, Mr. Sajin Vasgunawardhan. Now that may or may not be true, but where is the independent inquiry, or any inquiry for that matter? Who has it been presented to? What are the conclusions? What will be the actions? The way in which the Foreign Ministry, including the Minister, have dealt with the issue of the audit report and the issue of the assault on Dr. Chris Nonis indicate the complete collapse of our external relations apparatus, the decline of the foreign ministry into a mere shell. Professor Pires is now playing the same role that Anton Balasingham used to play vis-a-vis Mr. Prabhakaran. He is just the English language translator and spokesperson of the powerful cabal that runs this country.
There's more in that audit than just the renovations and the company, because it refers to lots of other irregularities which have to do with procurement activities, and also in addition also on the consular affairs, because there are the consular work is being assigned to various people around. This is not only in Switzerland, also in Italy. And this is what Asita Pereira exposed when he was in Italy and Rome as ambassador. There was a lot of, so there is many things that are taking place through the embassies that are irregular, not only in Geneva. So I think that this is, so and in the report you speak, there's a trafficking in furniture, there's a question of purchasing of tickets, there's a question of vehicle purchasing, renovation, so a number of things, including consular questions. So what I think is, and I've heard this being said, this is only just the tip of an iceberg. And I think what they're afraid of is, it's also a case study, in a sense. What they're going to find out here, what's happening there is happening elsewhere. And I think that's what they're concerned about. That there's going to be a much larger network of such irregular activities that are taking place through the embassies.
Professor Vijay Singh, it's all fine to say that the Public Accounts Committee is not doing its job, but on the whole this seems like Parliament is not doing its job. You could demand that this report be tabled in Parliament. You could
colleagues in Parliament have already done that. Vasanta Sennaik has written an excellent letter. But
there's been no response to Vasanta Sennaik.
There's been no response to any of the letters. I can show you a list of letters I get from Lalita Iratunga saying, I acknowledge receipt of your letter. But sometimes you get the impression the President is schizophrenic. I mean, he's the man who ordered this audit. Then he does nothing with it. With regard to Vasanta Sennaik, I told him the Foreign Minister should be got rid of, and the President had agreed. But then he laughs. The President has this terrible habit of disarming you by agreeing with things you say and then laughing.
Why would the President not want this report?
I have a hypothesis.
Is it not?
I have a hypothesis. I've seen this not only in matters such as the audit report, but also on matters of policy, foreign policy, domestic policy. Yal Devi open up links with the North, and the very next day there's a kind of an iron curtain on non-Sri Lankans visiting the North. See, I think what happens is that the President's instincts are right, his heart is in the right place, he gives an instruction, and then maybe within 24 hours one of two things happen. One is it is systematically undermined and sabotaged, such as the effort of Cyril Ramaphosa to establish communications between the TNA and the government to restart negotiations. So either it is sabotaged by the hawks, and these hawks are also in his inner family circle, or he is told by his establishment, as he chooses to call it, look, Your Excellency, that thing about Geneva residence or the audit report, if you allow that to go through, then it's one of our people who's going to get in. He's connected. He has helped us, or she has helped us, and this is where it'll wind up. Or this is really being pushed by people who are in the camp of the enemy or your critics, and then he backs off, even if he knows it's not true. But he feels that resistance from his power structure. When these guys come out of the woodwork, then he feels, I'm kind of outnumbered on this, let it go.
Ms. Karunarakam, do you agree? Do you think it's just that the President's heart and mind are in the right place, but he's being coerced into not bringing these issues up, the audit report, for example?
Coaxed and coerced, not necessarily coerced. You can't coerce Mahinda Rajapaksa. You can
coaxed into not wanting to do any of this. Do you think that's what it is?
Well, I first of all, I don't think that he is unaware of what's going on around him. I think he's made a choice. He has taken the decision to support that particular group for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It probably has to do with his vested interests. So I don't think that he's being in a sense coaxed into it, or it's a choice he has made. But it's a choice that he has made, and I want to come back to what you said about the state. There is no, the state doesn't represent the people anymore, in that sense. So he has made a choice for state which represents a particular group that I refer to as this cartel. Today the state has been taken over, hijacked by that cartel, and it's no longer the state that serves the interests of the people. So that's where I also see that's where the foreign policy is in the interest of that state, or the state that represents that particular group. So I think it's a choice that he has made. It's a conscious choice made by a politician who wants to stay in power.
Professor Vijay Singh, what do you think it is? Do you think it is a conscious choice made by a politician who wants to stay in power, or do you think that he's been coaxed into doing it?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a choice. I would agree with Tamara. But it's a conscious choice, I don't know, because as I said, you get glimmerings of the heart occasionally. They have got less in the last couple of years. I think one of the problems is it's also a bit of a siege mentality. For instance, he had shouted at Chris Lugunasekara told me, saying, "You also now an enemy and trying to stop my re-election." He got very upset with this business about, the Cardinal stopping Sargent visiting. But I also think there's one major problem which I don't think any leader in this country has had before. And that is his determination to set up a dynasty.
Yeah, you never know. We've seen things that have happened in Sri Lanka before with Mr. Bandaranaike. When you permit dangerous forces or you foster dangerous forces around you, then as in many countries, they use you to win an election. They use you as a facade, and then they install their chosen successor. And if they think that you are a problem, they ease you out. So I'm really very concerned about the president, whom I continue to support, albeit very critically. Very critical. Thank you.
Madam Gunanayakam, Professor Vijay Singh and Dr. Jayatilaka, thank you very much for joining us on News First. It's been a most enlightening and enriching discussion. It's been a pleasure to have the privilege of picking your brains on these very pressing issues. Thank you once again, and thank you also to our viewers. We want to hear from you. You can join in on the conversation on Twitter using the handle at Newsfirst_EN. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/newsfirst.english. Thank you very much for joining us. Good night.